three witches are called to serve in the country's witch army just as their female ancestors have before them. As they undergo training, they reconcile their differences in order to work as an effective unit. After doing well in an exercise, the cadets are rewarded with a trip to Salem town, where they face an unusual threat. On conscription day, a woman inside a mall waits for a blue balloon to float down into her hand, then she mumbles a spell under her breath. When she grabs its string, the balloon starts to expand until it finally bursts. At the sound of the pop, the people stop in their tracks, then begin filing into lines, climbing the stairs to the upper floor, where they await their turns to jump to their ends on the floor below. The woman is a member of an anarchist faction of witches called the Spree. As she drives away, she takes the car lighter and uses it to burn off her disguise, revealing her true face. In Chippewa session, Rael Collar comes home from school and turns off the TV after catching her father Edwin dozing in front of it. An elderly lady waits for her in the kitchen and presents her with food and money as payment for their session. She then expresses her gratitude to the aspiring cadet for deciding to serve the country. In the bedroom, the older woman lies down and chants a spell with Rael that instantly heals her illness. The young witch pulls up her shirt and sees that the sickness has transferred to her body. In a matrifocal allotment near Sacramento, Tally Craven is appalled as she watches news of the Spree's attack on TV. Fearing for her daughter's safety, her mother tries to convince her to reject the military's call. However, the committed young witch feels it is her duty. In New York, Abigail Bellwether has a conversation with her mother, General Petra. Petra pressures her daughter to succeed in training to honor their family's name. Back at the Collar home, Edwin gives Rael his late wife's bowerbird combat charm to keep her safe. At midnight, a sparkling medal appears in front of Rael, Abigail, and Tally and calls them to serve. Following their oaths, the medal coins with their engraved names fall onto their outstretched palms. The following day, Tally shows her military medal to an airport attendant, but the flight to Boston is full. An elderly man overhears their conversation and volunteers to give up his seat for the cadet. Meanwhile, some people in line look at her with disdain because she's a witch. In Fort Salem, the young witches march together as they enter the premises. In the hall, everyone except Rael are stomping their feet to pay respect to General Sarah Alder, who orients them about the Army's operations. In the Cersei barracks, Sergeant Anacostia Quatermain welcomes the recruits and informs them that her job is to keep them alive through basic training. She makes it clear that everyone will rise and fall as a unit, which means one person's performance is a measure of everyone's performance. She then tells the girls to look behind their medals to find their rooms and meet their unit sisters. Rael finds her sweet and meets the other two witches in her unit, Tally and Abigail. Tally notices the tension between the punky cadet and the general's daughter after their initial introductions. To break the ice, she casually mentions growing up in a matrifocal compound where there are no men. Shocked, Abigail questions Tally's purity and asks her to see her mark. After seeing her unit member's plain mark, she shows her shiny mark, which she claims she obtained after making love for the first time. The curious Tally asks Rael if her mark is shiny too, but the reserved cadet answers with a smirk. That evening, the three gather in a circle on the floor and get to know each other. Tally shares that she joined the army in spite of her mother's objections. Abigail says that she lost her grandmothers, aunts, and cousins in the war. When it's Rael's turn, she places a blue rose petal on the candle that sparks a bright flame. She mentions that her mother perished in a firefight a year ago. Following the sharing of their respective tales, the three witches join hands and recite a chant in honor of their lost loved ones. The following day, the recruits are trained to use their vocals to manipulate the fountain water. A frustrated Rael ditches the exercise and wanders outside. In a field, she comes across a witch summoning multiple tornadoes. Scylla, a sophomore cadet who skipped training, joins Rael and expresses a desire to learn the skill, but the young cadet is pessimistic, stating that she may end up working as a medic like her mother. Soon after, a group of senior witches approaches them, marks their medals with a D for demerit, and orders them to report to their sergeant. Raelle goes back to the barracks, where Anacostia admonishes her. The sergeant tells her what will happen if she doesn't work hard and reminds her that an esteemed bellwether is in her unit. After the talk, she gives the stubborn cadet a package from her father that has her mother's wartime letters in it. Later that day, Abigail and Tally check the daily rankings and discover that their unit is ranked 175th. Enraged, Abigail confronts Raelle in the cafeteria about her absence from training. Suddenly, their heated argument is interrupted by the news. Once again, the spree has launched an attack, this time on a cruise ship, resulting in multiple casualties. After a series of physical training sessions, the exhausted Raelle sees Scylla again, who reveals to her that she is a necro-witch, specializing in dealing with the loss of life. Later, Scylla takes Raelle in a secluded area to take salva, a star-shaped government-sanctioned substance. After sticking the salva on their necks, their skin absorbs it, and they find themselves levitating. Moments later, Anacostia stops the floating cadets and sends them to the infirmary. While Raelle rests on her bed, a medic pulls up her shirt and notices her transferred wound. When she finds out that the young cadet got her talent from her mother, she tells her that she has the potential to become a great healer. Across the room, the sergeant confronts Scylla while casting an unsettling spell on her. She threateningly orders her to stay away from the new recruit. Because of what Raelle did, Anacostia summons Abigail and Tally and tells them that their unit is on thin ice. Anxious, Abigail sees General Adler and requests for reassignment, but is turned down. The general convinces her to push through, telling her that she had a witch in her unit similar to Raelle who ended up saving her several times. Meanwhile, Raelle reads one of her mother's letters. Her mother hopes she won't have the same experience she did. She reveals that their mission leader was Abigail's mom Petra, who put their company in danger. This information fuels Raelle's rage, so she searches for Abigail. In the training hall, Raelle grabs her ropes and challenges Abigail. As they battle, Abigail argues that her mom shouldn't be blamed for Raelle's loss because soldiers perish all the time. In the middle of the confrontation, storm clouds start to appear, so the sergeant breaks it off. As the trainees leave the hall, Anacostia informs Tally that Abigail requested reassignment earlier that day. A disappointed Tally confronts Abigail about her plan to leave their unit. The general's daughter tries to convince her that Raelle's poor performance is holding them back. Tally argues that she should be the one leaving because Abigail has a sense of superiority and Raelle is wildly irresponsible. Later that night, Raelle expresses her frustration with the stringent rules, and Scylla suggests that Raelle's best way out of her situation is to go through training and learn to access her true powers. The enigmatic witch then draws Raelle in for a kiss. The following morning, the units gather to practice their choral sequences. Raelle is able to perform her vocals well, carrying her unit sisters in creating a source of power that impresses the officers. Following their training, the trio celebrates their success in the cafeteria. Tally gets up and walks away, leaving Abigail and Raelle to talk. The general's daughter sincerely apologizes for their poor start, which Raelle accepts. The blonde cadet is excited for them to work as a team, but emphasizes that friendship isn't required. Back in their room, Raelle is taping up postcards on her wall when Tally notices her combat charm. She reveals that it once belonged to her mom and cries as she wonders if she wore it on the day she perished. In a dorm room, the witch responsible for the conscription day attack smiles at the mirror while seeing the blue balloon. When she hears someone coming, she immediately burns her face to change it. Minutes later, Raelle knocks on the door and gives Scylla a kiss, unaware that she's a member of the spree. The next morning, Raelle wakes up in Scylla's room and they share a kiss. The young cadet inquires about Scylla's origins, only to receive a vague response. She claims that her family moves frequently and that neither of her parents served in the military. Late for inspection, Raelle rushes to leave Scylla's dorm without returning her kiss on the cheek. Meanwhile, U.S. President Kelly Wade meets with General Alder to speak about the spree attacks. The general reveals that they noticed a signature pattern on the latest incident in Kiev. The spree traps the lethal sound in any airtight container, such as a balloon or plastic bottle, and uses it to unleash the hypnotic noise. In the cafeteria, Raelle approaches her unit to inform them that she's been tasked with guard duty as punishment for being late for inspection. Once again, Abigail expresses her disappointment with her indifferent behavior that might affect their unit's standing. Meanwhile, Tally recognizes her friend Glory and gives her a hug. As her old friend rambles about missing home, she consoles her. Suddenly, General Clary interrupts their reunion to get a cup of coffee. The general takes a look at Tally and says she reminds her of her daughter. Anacostia walks in to announce that the top 5 high-ranking units will go on a trip to Salem town, where they can enjoy unsupervised time off base. The cadets, except for Raelle, express their excitement by stomping their feet. After the president leaves, General Adler speaks with Anacostia about the meeting. Later, she asks the sergeant about the Bellwether unit and expresses her interest in them after hearing their impressive performance in vocal training. Later that day, in the training hall, Abigail recognizes Lieber, with whom she exchanges insults. Abigail explains that their mothers hated each other back in War College. Later, she reveals that the root of her anger is the fact that her rival danced with her date back in her debut party, stealing the spotlight away. Suddenly, Anacostia walks in the middle of the hall and hurls a spear at Tally, who she instructs to attack her. After a few attempts, the hesitant cadet slips and fails to do the task. As the sergeant calls for volunteers, Abigail and Lieber compete to get the spear, but the general's daughter succeeds. The competitive Abigail attacks Anacostia, but the spear splinters into pieces before it even hits her eye. The sergeant introduces this as a spell called Wind Shear, a site-specific impact absorbent shield created by layering 2 sounds. Later that evening, Raelle is on guard duty where she meets Lieutenant Graves, a War College sophomore specializing in necro. Upon learning what her craft is, Raelle asks if Graves knows Scylla. The lieutenant responds that she knows her to be a bright girl whose parents were rumored to have perished in the army's hands. Graves offers to cover for Raelle after she notices the young cadet looking sleepy, but Raelle wishes to finish the task. The lieutenant then tells her to be patient and wait for Scylla to open up to her. When Raelle leaves, the sophomore witch takes out her lighter and burns her face, revealing her true identity as Scylla. The following morning in the training hall, the Bellwether squad practice their wind shear spells. Anacostia catches a napping Raelle and kicks her foot to wake her up. The sleepy private tries to reason by bringing up her guard duty, but the sergeant is unmoved. As a unit punishment, the strict officer calls Abigail and instructs her to vocalize for a long period of time, resulting in a strained throat. In the cafeteria, Tally talks about how excited she is to go off base so they can take a break from training. While the ecstatic cadet is talking, Abigail suddenly coughs blood into her mug. She glares at Raelle and tells her that she should have been the one punished. The guilty private offers to fix her throat, but is stopped when Abigail gets weirded out by the chant. Seconds later, Raelle storms out of the cafeteria after seeing Scylla outside the window. She runs after her, but she disappears into the woods. When she turns around, she sees Abigail following her, making sure she isn't late for training. Back in the dorm, Tally calls her mom to thank her for the combat charm she sent. Their conversation starts off well, but Tally feels uncomfortable when her worried mother begs her to come back home. She hangs up after she says that Fort Salem is her home. In Windstrike training, all the units are instructed to generate a propulsive burst of air to strike a metal wall. After hearing Abigail complain about her painful throat, Rael responds that it's her fault for not letting her finish the healing spell. Meanwhile, Tally's lack of focus annoys Abigail, and they both end up arguing about their moms. Rael cuts their argument off, and they all prepare to cast their spell. With their combined tension, they generate a strong wind strike that pierces a hole in the metal wall. Their impressive performance secures them a spot in the top 5 best-performing units and eligible for the trip. The next day, the top 5 units get off the bus and walk around Salem town, where a sign prohibiting balloons or inflatables is posted. As the units walk around town, they come across stands that sell General Sarah Adler dolls. A little girl gets Tally's attention, and she lets her try on her army medal. That night, the units watch the pageant portraying General Alder's public trial hundreds of years ago. The bored Abigail, who has seen this multiple times, goes to a pizza place nearby, where she is followed by Rael. Meanwhile, in the war room, Alder and the other officers watch the events in Kiev via General Kali's daughter's eyes. The witches enter an abandoned storage facility where they see a lone glass bottle hanging from the ceiling. Suddenly, the bottle explodes, causing the witches to turn on each other, eliminating the unit. After the pageant, a man, who looks to be in a hurry, runs into Tally and Glory, which they find quite strange. Later, they join Rael and Abigail enjoying each other's company. When Scylla appears, Rael introduces her to the unit, and the Necro Witch shares an immediate mutual dislike with Abigail. In the forest cemetery, Scylla demonstrates her necromancy to Rael and makes a mushroom grow on a bird carcass. Scylla then apologizes for withholding her life's details from Rael and admits that she finds it difficult to open up. Mesmerized by her beauty, Rael leans in to kiss her. Back at the restaurant, a man bursts in to warn the diners that the spree have been spotted in the area. The people panic, and the witches do their best to calm everyone down. However, a middle-aged man confronts Tally, saying all witches are alike and should be to blame for the attacks. When the man refuses to stand down, the offended cadet uses Windstrike and knocks him off his feet. In the war room, Alder and the other generals are devastated by the loss of the squad and are inconsolable. She then assures General Clary that she'll track down the spree and make them pay. The mournful general questions the army's failed tactics and proposes they resort to drastic measures to stop any further casualties among their troops. Later that night, in the dorm room, the tipsy witches are laughing as they recall their chaotic encounter at the pizza joint. Turns out, the so-called spree attack was a false alarm caused by someone accidentally letting go of a harmless balloon. Tally thanks Abigail for covering up for her when Anacostia questioned who threw the wind at the civilian. Later, she stands up and raises her glass to honor the witches in the room. Meanwhile, Scylla talks to the blue balloon in the mirror. She confirms that Rael is hers, and when she asks what to do next, the balloon tells her to stay on course. When she mentions that she wants the extraction to happen soon, the balloon tells her to move closer to the mirror. As she steps forward, the mysterious entity communicating with Scylla shatters the glass, startling the Necro Witch.